Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we recap the week that was, led by blown opportunities, some hot bats, and Mark Vientos capitalizing on getting another shot. We preview the London trip and the potential return of Francisco Alvarez, go down on the farm, make new scoreboard predictions, and of course, answer your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel and leave a mailbag question there, or wherever you get your podcast. Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today and subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to leave us a review, drop us a mailbag question with that review. Watch us on YouTube and also ask mailbag questions in the comments under the show there as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, I feel like I say it at the top of the show every week, but a bit more of the same. When they hit, they don't pitch. When they pitch, they don't hit. The Mets, a little bit more, I'd say, in a treading water phase since we last recorded a show rather than just bottoming out. But, Joe, while some bright spots of the lineup have gotten hot, Mark Vientos really capitalizing on being the everyday third baseman. Starling Marte looking closer to the 2022 version of himself recently. It feels like everything that was going so well for this team in the beginning of the season, notably the bullpen arms out of nowhere, has come to a crashing halt.
And add Francisco Lindor to that list. He's been fantastic too over the last couple of weeks. But this is kind of what we've been saying about this team for a while now. We said this offense is going to hit at some point. There's no way you have a lineup with this quantity of professional hitters and they're just going to be no good for the whole season. So now that the offense is starting to pick up, that means the bullpen is taking that step back. And that's really the big thing now. The starting pitching has been fine. I'm not overly concerned with what the starting pitching is providing. But when, on Monday night's game against Monday night's game against Washington, after blowing games against Arizona, the Mets almost blew their 7th lead in a month when leading after 8 innings. The bullpen simply needs to close games because as much as everyone's screaming and we're going to get into, potential selling situations that could transpire, Mets are only 4 games out of a wild card. And I'm not here to tell you the Mets are about to go on a run, but the team has the month of June to convince David Stearns that he should not break up this team.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to right now. And consistency has been what we've been hoping for from everything all at once, where, hey, if you're hitting and pitching like you were earlier in the season, maybe you rip off 7 out of 10. And if you rip off 7 out of 10, you're kind of clawing back to mattering in the NL wildcard, which is insanely uninspiring right now. If anybody hasn't taken a look, it is laughable. And, I think Mets fans got a real glimpse of that because Arizona was a team in the World Series last year. They had massive expectations, especially after adding Jordan Montgomery, and they've kind of fallen on their face out of the gate this season. Corbin Carroll has had an abysmal start to the season. The Mets really got after Montgomery. It just goes to show you how open things can be in baseball, no matter what the preseason projections say. But the Mets have not taken advantage of that at all. If anything, they've been one of the teams that have underperformed, which is really saying something because some people thought the Mets would be, hey, maybe the final wildcard team or just come up a little bit short. And they've been even below that so far this year. But you're right, Joe. That's the issue right now when you look at the Mets as a whole is that, listen, JD Martinez has done his job, right? I think things have been a little disappointing overall from a guy like Pete Alonso, definitely from Jeff McNeil. We can only talk about that so many times. Lindor's start was atrocious. He's gotten it, he's figured it out as of recent. But at the end of the day, it just might be too late, right? My thought here is, Joe, when you look at this, Francisco Alvarez is coming back really soon, which is great news. It's a big boost to the lineup. If Mark Vientos really keeps this going, say Mark Vientos hits 24 to 27 home runs this year, which would be hands up. Everybody's celebrating that. That'd be incredible. And then you're looking at it and going, okay, Vientos is going to play one of the corners for a long time here. The reality is when things are fully clicking, maybe in a couple weeks with the middle of the lineup being Alvarez, Vientos, and Martinez, and say Pete kind of gets back on track, Lindor stays on track, and Marte continues to produce, have the Mets already made up their minds and they go, you know what, this team just doesn't have it out of the gate this year. It's too risky to try to, and we saw this last year, right? The Mets had an interesting decision last year where it was, hey, you could try for something in the second half, but they didn't have the faith of the people above. And quite frankly, it was hard to disagree with them at the time, whether the clubhouse didn't like that or not. It feels like, Joe, they are trending towards a similar fate. Now, I'll say this. If this group under Stearns decides, hey, they don't have it, it's not going to be, okay, they traded Luis Severino. Okay, they traded JD Martinez. It is going to be a full-blown fire sale. So the pressure is on for the Mets in these next couple weeks, like it hasn't been, it feels like, in quite some time, because it's not just the guys on one-year deals. I think it's deeper than that, Joe.
I don't think David Stearns is going to be disillusioned by an okay month of June that keeps them kind of afloat. I was talking to a buddy about this the other day, and he pointed out to me, don't forget David Stearns, and he has been on record that he regrets it, traded Josh Hader while in a playoff hunt. So he is not afraid to sell if he doesn't see it with the team. And the Mets, to your point, Connor, they need to step up. This needs to be a big June. I'm not saying it doesn't have to be the Phillies, who basically don't lose any baseball games. But if the Mets go a game or two over 500 in the month of June, I don't think that's going to sway David Stearns from making a decision that he has to make. And I am on board with you that if this doesn't take a 180 turnaround to, being a team that can viably contend for one of those wildcard spots, I think this is going to be, I don't want to say rebuild, because I don't think rebuild is in Steve Cohen's DNA, but it's going to be much more cleaning house than just getting out of a couple rentals. It could be Pete Alonso, JD Martinez, Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana. You could go into the bullpen with a few guys. Starling Marte, especially if he keeps hitting, you could convince a team that despite 35 years old, he could bring something to you. So the Mets are under a lot of heat for probably the first time since the end of September 2022, when they were, trying to lock up the division. It's been that long, and pressure on.
I'll tell you this, Joe. I think what we've seen recently too, as the play starts to decline, not just when he's playing, but actually scaling back how much he's playing, I think there's a world where the Mets would pay down some of what's remaining on Jeff McNeil's deal and just say, hey, you'd have to, because he's just been that bad this year. But I think it's something they'd be willing to do just to kind of wipe that slate clean and say, hey, this is going to be a Ronnie Mauricio or Luis Angel Acuna second base of the future.
And very importantly, which Steve Cohen showed last year, because I was talking to the same friend about last year's deadline. 5 days before the trade deadline, it was the Mets would have to eat all of Max Scherzer and Verlander's salary if they even wanted something slightly decent. And they ate, I believe, all of the 2023 money and then half of the 2024 money and got, 3 top 100 prospects between those two pitchers. So if Steve Cohen is willing to continue that trend, Pete Alonso can net you another top 100 prospect. I don't think Severino can, but I bet he can net you someone that's probably, not far out of the outside looking in. And that opens up the opportunities for a Jeff McNeil or a Starling Marte, where you don't have to eat all the money, but Steve Cohen's seeming willingness to do so can elevate the return, which is ultimately, when you're selling, the most important thing is to get the best talent back.
On a more positive outlook on the future, Joe, we have to talk about Vientos. I mean, right now, this is someone who historically has killed lefties. And now we're seeing that in the big leagues, where the Mets have committed to Vientos, finally, something they were not willing to do, it felt like, the last couple of years, and even the beginning of this year with the status of Brett Beatty. And, I mean, number one, he brings a power bat in the middle of the lineup. There's just not a lot of guys in the Mets big league club and in the system that can hit the ball hard consistently as Vientos. I mean, that was what it was always about, was getting the strikeouts down, because when he makes contact, he's going to hit the ball really, really hard. For the last couple of years, Joe, the Mets have been abysmal against lefties. And this year it feels like a different story. And when you look at Vientos right now, I know it's a small sample size, but I think it doesn't need insane context because this is kind of how he was coming through the system, and I think it's the strength of his game. When you look at him against lefties, 32 plate appearances, and he's only got 34 plate appearances against righties, so it's almost an even split. His OPS is almost 1,500, Joe. I mean, this is someone who is getting on base more than half the time against lefties. He's hit 3 of his 5 home runs against lefties. He is somebody that can just kill left-handed pitching, and he's been capable against righties. Not great, but capable, that he doesn't need to be a platoon player there, Joe. So I think for Vientos right now, we don't want to get over our skis, but if you're a Mets fan and you've kind of come to terms with, all right, we're going to ride out this month and see if this team can right this season, because they do deserve the chance to do that before we just say, hey, trade. But if you're also that type of Mets fan, which we absolutely are, you're always kind of having one foot towards the future and then one foot in the now. The hope for you is that the combination of Vientos and Alvarez, who are going to be here for a long time, if Vientos continues to hit, we know Alvarez is going to be here a long time no matter what. That's the kind of power that can really, I don't want to say carry a lineup, but be a pivotal, sustainable success kind of aspect of the lineup that this team really, really needs from young players right now.
If only they listened to the Mets pod for the last 2 years. I mean, this time 2 years ago, we were telling them, don't trade for DHs. Let Mark Vientos get
Buck
a shot.
would never play him. Yeah, and we knew that from the and I know there's been people that are like, oh, you didn't like Buck. Well, look now at Mendoza. There were so many issues there that drove us insane, and I will absolutely put Buck at the forefront of that. He refused to play this guy. His confidence was shot, and now you look what happens when you actually give a guy a chance to play and boost his confidence a little bit. It's a miracle.
Yeah, Vientos had no opportunity. Now he has opportunity, and he's running with it. And when we were down in Port St. Lucie, at that time, JD Martinez wasn't a Met. The idea was Brett Beatty was the third baseman. Mark Vientos was the DH. And we were just hanging out on the dugout, and Vientos, said hi, asked if he's ready for the opportunity, and biggest smile on his face. He's like, I've been waiting for this. So he's been waiting for this opportunity to show what he has. And look, this is a guy that has always hit at every level. And that doesn't always translate to the major leagues. And, a month from now, we might be like, oh, there's the Mark Vientos that struggled at the big league level. But in the early going, he's working better counts. Like you said, OBP over 500 against left-handed pitching. And he hits the crap out of the ball, for lack of a better term. When he hits it, he hits it. And when he hit the home run against Washington, he was like, I didn't know it was out until I saw the exit velocity. So this is also a guy that's in tune with that stuff. He hit it, saw the exit velocity, and he's just like, oh, okay, that's going to go out then. So, I mean, it's an exciting development, because when you look at Brett Beatty, he obviously made huge strides defensively, but he has not grown offensively at the big league level to the point that the Mets had hoped and expected he would. And Vientos being able to step into that role and show something allows that opportunity over the next month to build that deeper lineup that you were talking about before, Connor. When Francisco Alvarez comes back, it's going to be interesting to see how you want to order it. Do you put Alvarez 5th, Vientos 6th? Does that push Marte down to 7? Now you're talking about that deeper type of lineup that we talked about in spring training could be the case this year. So good for Mark Vientos, and he's really proving, I think, a lot of doubters wrong.
Let's close out the now with the bullpen, because this was the strength of this team out of the gate, and a lot of things have not gone their way recently. Edwin Diaz now on the IL. It was a tough start to the season for Diaz. Jorge Lopez DFA'd. We don't need to go down that saga. It feels like years ago at this point, but let's call it what it is from a baseball perspective, Joe. A big part of this bullpen in the beginning of this year, Jorge Lopez, and now they're without him. Reed Garrett was basically the best reliever in baseball for a while. He's come back to reality. They are now putting guys like Adam Ottavino and Jake Diekman in really high leverage situations. And the reality is, especially for Ottavino, who is just having a really, really tough go of it this year. And Ottavino traditionally can be one of those guys that he's an every other year kind of guy. When you look at his track record throughout his career, he'll have a year where he has an ERA in the 4 to 5s, and then he'll go back down to the 2s. His first year with the Mets in 2022 was incredible. Last year, he had a lot of really bad moments that were big moments, but overall, he was not a bad reliever. He was just an average reliever. This year, Joe, nothing has gone his way at all. And the truth is right now, the Mets are relying on guys like Ottavino and Diekman throughout this stretch where they're trying to get right. Do you think the Mets, I don't want to say like the horseshoe fell out of the pocket, because I don't think they were just lucky with this bullpen in the beginning of the year. I think there was legitimate reason to buy into it. But do you think now the adversity is going to be a big mountain to climb, especially with their $100 million man on the IL and just kind of physically and mentally going through it with Edwin Diaz, unfortunately?
It shows that there's probably not an analytic for this, but it shows there is a difference to pitching in the ninth inning. I mean, when Edwin Diaz was pitching in the ninth inning early in the season and Ottavino was throwing in the seventh, he looked a lot better. Now Ottavino's being pushed
Drew Smith was
to close out games. And Drew Smith, now he's back. So when Brooks Raley went down, we said on this show, they can survive without Brooks Raley. And they did. Tough to survive without Brooks Raley, without Edwin Diaz, without Drew Smith for a period of time. And now it's forcing guys like Jake Diekman and Adam Ottavino to try to close games. And you're seeing kind of what's coming along with that. So I don't know, like you said, Connor, I don't know if it's like the luck ran out or the clock struck midnight or whatever, term you want to use on the bullpen. I think that the adversity has gotten a little too great. And now it's one of those situations that we wanted Edwin Diaz to get that step back to build his confidence. Now I'm like, can we get Edwin Diaz back here? Because the way these games are being closed out, I mean, it's not even just blowing 1-run leads. They're blowing 4-run leads, 5-run leads in the ninth inning. And, last night against Washington, I'm a positive guy by nature. You guys know me. I was like, how are the Mets losing this one?
Right.
And, they were able to pull it off. But the bullpen right now is the biggest issue with the Mets. As I said, the starting pitching's been okay. Offense is taking a step forward. And, maybe it's giving more opportunities to a Dedniel Nunez, who has looked really sharp when he's come up. So they're battling through it right now. And it's going to be crucial for this June push for this bullpen to take that step forward.
Well, and a big part of that is going to be the London series, right? Against the Phillies, who look like maybe the best team in baseball. And the Mets, it's frustrating because you feel like they should have easily taken 3 or 4 from the Diamondbacks. Instead, they split because of that blown Sunday game. They hold on against the Nationals. We'll see what they could do with the next 2. And then they have the London series that I'm not saying there's a different level for this London series. It's still 2 baseball games in June. But this is, if you're the Mets and you want to kind of show that you can right the ship a little bit, you go out there and you hang with the Phillies in 2 games on an international stage where this lineup is starting to look better. They're trying to piece it together with the bullpen, and the return of Drew Smith is a big one. And then I think, Joe, not just from a baseball perspective in terms of on the field and numbers and production, but an emotional lift. And this is not fair to do to a 22-year-old. But Francisco Alvarez is the biggest shot in the arm this team can get right now. And boy, did they need him. And I think a catcher coming back from the injury he had quicker than expected always scares you. Or I think at a minimum should temper your expectations for what Alvarez is going to do in June. I think Alvarez is going to have a monster second half of the season because we know he's going to be here. But I think you need to kind of, and, we'll see what Luis Torrens can do as the backup catcher with a little bit more offensive punch than they typically have from that spot. But I think, Joe, emotionally what Alvarez can bring, if that can't help the Mets right the ship, it's just not going to happen. And an international stage can give you a little bit different adrenaline than what you've had.
Yeah, so Alvarez won't be there for the London series. He's potentially, next homestand. But between those
Which is
two,
smart. It would be a lot to throw. Flying overseas for anything, especially being a professional athlete, that is a really tough adjustment on the body in general. It's not the time to throw him into that.
And I'm excited for the London series because I like growing the game. Like, I know a lot of people kind of hate how the NFL games go all over the world. I like it. So I like the idea of trying to grow Major League Baseball. And I know there is a heck of a Mets fan contingency in the UK because I checked the podcast charts and they love the Mets pod.
We love them. Yes.
Yeah, so the UK loves the Mets. They love the Mets pod, so we love them. And I hope it's absolute scenes over there, and they have they have a good series against the Phillies, but it would be a big mental boost to them if they can somehow pull off 2 games against the Phillies. I know it sounds absolutely crazy to say, but if they could fly all the way across the pond and somehow win 2 games from Philly, come back, and Francisco Alvarez is waiting at the door, waving, saying, "Hi, guys, I've been waiting for you." And he gets thrown into the lineup, into that clubhouse. I think that is something that can set the team in motion for that June that they have to have. And if not, then, in a couple of weeks, our conversation is going to shift real quick on the extreme of the other side.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is the spot they put themselves in. So while people might sit here and be like, you guys are insane if you think they need to or can take 2 out of 2 from Philadelphia in London, of all places, I get it. But the Mets are 10 games under 500 as we record this podcast. They need to take 2 out of 3 from the Nationals, and they need to try to take both against the Phillies to generate some momentum here where you come back to the United States, Alvarez is back, and you're 7 games under 500. And then you're in one of those spots where if you win 6 out of 10, you start to slowly climb back to 500, which in this National League landscape, I mean, it's weird to call it hilarious right now, Joe, but if I had to ask you off the top of your head, and you probably know the answer because you're obsessed with baseball, like league-wide, how many teams in the National League do you think have a record above 500 right now?
4, 5 at most.
So the Padres are 1 game above 500 now after a brutal start. So that gets us to 5. It is the Phillies by a large margin. They are 23 games over. The Braves, who have not played well recently at all. I mean, they're 4-6 in their last 10. It's been a rough stretch. They're still 33-24, but their injuries have just piled to the point of, a lot of problems for them. But they are over 500. Out of the Central, it's just the Brewers. Literally just the Brewers out of the Central. And then in the West, of course, the Dodgers, and by a hair, the Padres. The Giants and Diamondbacks greatly underachieving. The Cubs are under 500. The Cardinals, it feels like, spend a ton of money each year. They're under 500. Arenado has not been good at all. It's just crazy that this is how the National League stands right now. And I think it makes you more frustrated as a Mets fan that they are not capitalizing off of this.
Yes.
But that's just the reality that they face right now if they want to start doing that as we head, eventually what the conversation looks like for July. You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's start the down on the farm version of the mailbag. This one from M. Herman 8581. Thank you for the 5-star review. Isn't it a disadvantage that our upper minor league teams play in bad weather locations? Nobody enjoys playing baseball in the cold, and it also leads to injuries. Syracuse and Binghamton don't get warm until June. Brooklyn's a little better, except you've got the freezing Coney Island wind. Shouldn't we consider treating the future of our organization better? It's interesting to me, Joe.
You don't really have a choice per se. Like, you can't just decide I'm dropping a stadium in West Palm Beach, Florida, and calling it my AAA affiliate.
Well, Coney Island, that's not changing. There's 0. That's not going anywhere.
No, and honestly, they're probably
I love it.
None of them are probably going anywhere. So I think it is a valid point. I just don't think there's really anything you could do about it. And
build a dome in the minor leagues.
Yeah, Steve Cohen doesn't want to do it in the major leagues. Maybe it's more affordable on a minor league field. I don't know. But look, it is unfortunate, and it's something that we take into account when we talk about early season stats of more hitters than pitchers, honestly, because I think hitters are more negatively impacted by colder weather. But that's why we sometimes give the benefit of the doubt to the Luis Angel Acuñas and in the past, Mark Vientos and Brett Beatty, who may have struggled in their first look of April in cold weather. So fair question, really nothing they could do about it, but it is beneficial when it comes to calling guys up and sending guys down. And obviously the rules have changed now where you can only do it 5 times a year to option someone down. But I will always remember poor Jacob Rame. Do you remember Jacob Rame, the reliever wore the glasses? That poor guy made 100 flights to Las Vegas and New York back and forth because that's when the Mets AAA affiliate was in Vegas. I mean,
He probably takes 3 free vacations every year because of the sky miles he has.
That is very true, but it's a convenient thing, and I don't envision anything changing, but I get the question.
Oh man, Jacob Rame, what a throwback name. I had to see what he's up to right now. I don't even know if he's currently pitching. He's not. He's been out of the league for a long time.
Yeah. I just remember the glasses, and yeah.
Man, what a throwback. The Sky Miles King. All right, the next one from JDog 2023. This one on YouTube. Mailbag question from European listener and Mets fan. Before the season started, Christian Scott, Mike Vasil, and Dom Hamel were considered the big three in pitching prospects, also by your show. However, in your last episode, you didn't even mention Vasil and Hamel anymore and only talked about, correct me if I'm wrong, Sproat and Tidwell as potential 2024 call-ups. Have you soured on Vasil and Hamel, and what do you think will happen to them? Joe, I'll let you take the reins in a second. I think what I don't want to be mixed up, when we do Down on the Farm, we try to rotate names as much as possible. We don't make this the Dom Hamel segment or the Mike Vasil segment. We have talked about on the show that Vasil got off to a really rough start this year while Hamel was fine. I think also, I mean, me personally, I don't expect to see Sproat and Tidwell up in 2024. I think one of us said that. That was definitely a slip of the tongue. But Joe, take it away.
Yeah, Mike Vasil has, I mean, there's no better way to put it. He hasn't figured out the AAA level. And when I watch him pitch, it's not like his stuff has regressed or anything from what it was in AA. I know we talked to him when we were down in spring training, and he talked about some of the issues with the ABS system that they have at the AAA level. And I even speculated on this show, I believe, during spring training and leading into the season, that Dom Hamel might struggle with that as well, because his pitches move so much that they are going to not get caught by the automatic system as well. And I think that is something that, I haven't spoken to either, so I don't want to say it's in their heads, but it has to some degree be in their heads where they feel like they threw a strike, but it just missed, so thus it's not a strike. And I think at the level below that, they're probably used to getting an inch off the plate, a couple inches off the plate, whereas this is now a strike is a strike, a ball is a ball. And I think it's been a tough go for him. Dom Hamel got off to a good start. He's been struggling more of late. So I'm not by any means writing them off. I think it's just kind of the natural flow of a season. And when you talk about these prospects, we do try to rotate, as you said. But there's going to be more focus put on the guys that are putting together better seasons. That's, what it comes down to. And obviously Brandon Sproat's been unbelievable at the AA level, and Tidwell's off to a decent start at the AAA level. And we'll see kind of how that pans out for him. So not giving up on Vasil and Hamel, but, they need to take a step forward at the AAA level if they want to be considered for an opportunity here in 2024, where, let's be honest, Connor, there's a possibility in a month and a half the Mets trade like 3 or 4 starters from the rotation. So
just add up people.
Yeah, there's going to be opportunity for somebody, and they need to see that and grab it, and they just haven't as of yet.
All right, this one from Robert C457 on YouTube, and Joe, we could be a little lighter on this one because this is way down the system. But do you think Stanley, Consuegra, or Jack Wenninger have potential to make the Major League club in the next few years? I feel like those are two names that we don't talk about a lot and aren't tracked as heavily for obvious reasons in the system.
Yeah, I mean, these are two guys that won't be in my top 30 update, but just a little bit about him. Stanley Consuegra is a guy that when I was making my preseason top 30 and talking to people in the organization, we knew he was repeating Brooklyn. They thought he was going to take over at the Brooklyn level, and he's been much better over the last couple of weeks. But this is a guy that can hit the ball very hard, has a very strong arm in the outfield, but he just hasn't taken those kind of raw tools that he has and put it together consistently on the field. If he's able to do that, he obviously can push himself up to the AA level. And Jack Wenninger is a pitching prospect. He doesn't have huge stuff. He's, low 90s, but he's missed a bunch of bats at low A St. Lucie. He's had a bit of an issue with the home run ball, but certainly a guy to watch with 60 strikeouts in just over 40 innings. So he is missing some bats and will probably earn his way up to Brooklyn in the not too distant future. I'm not going to go ahead and throw some major league expectations on, guys that probably won't be in my top 30, but I fully appreciate how much fans are into the minor league system, that they are going for these kind of deep cut prospects. And, we get questions about Jet Williams and Drew Gilbert and all the top prospects in the system. But to be able to talk about Stanley Consuegra and Jack Wenninger a little bit on this show, I think is a good thing. And, we'll see how they develop. There's been plenty of guys that didn't make top 30 lists or whatever that went on to have big league careers. And, we'll just see as they progress through the minors what they can become.
Just a quick shout for our friends at the Cyclones. They're home in Brooklyn through Sunday, hosting the Aberdeen Ironbirds, minor league affiliate of the Orioles. If you know a thing or two about the Orioles system these days, it's just talent after talent. Tickets available at brooklyncyclones.com. Joe, let's review our scoreboard predictions from last week. Over-under push was set at 1 for Brett Beatty home runs. Joe, you went under. I went under. Brett Beatty went under. A point for both of us. Over-under push was set at 2 for Mark Vientos home runs. Joe, you went under. Me, the longtime Mark Vientos believer on this show, pushed. I'm just kidding. A little dig at Joe. I get the point. Over-under push at 3. Mets starters going at least 6 innings. Joe, you went push. I went push. They only had 2 guys go 6 innings, so no points awarded. Yes or no, will Cowboy Ohtani, Nolan McLean, hit his first Double-A home run by our next show? I said yes. Joe, you said no. Cowboy Ohtani hit his home run. Point to me. Yes or no, will Christian Scott get his first major league win by our next show? Joe, you said yes. I said no. I got a point. Over-under push was set at 4 for Mets wins. We both pushed. They had 3. No points awarded. Joe, 1 point on the week. I had 4 points on the week. Joe, you still lead the season series 18-17. Boy, did I need that one in the worst way. We got a good matchup going into the summer right now. Let's keep it rolling here for this week. 4 games because of the London series, less games on the docket. A lot of travel for these Mets. 4 games, 2 against the Nationals, 2 against the Phillies in London. Over, under, push, set at 1, Joe, for Mark Vientos home runs. I won the week. I'll take first dibs. I will go push. I'll think Vientos hits a home run one home run in these next 4 games. What about you?
Push. I think he's going to keep his momentum going. He'll hit 1, and who knows? Maybe we'll log on and he'll have hit 3. It could happen.
Well, if he's going against lefties, it's a lock of the century.
Yeah.
Over under push is set at 1 for Mets starters going at least 6 innings, Joe.
I'll go over. I think that's probably a little bold. I think they can accomplish those potentially in these couple of Washington games. But if they could just do 1 and 1, there you go. There's 2.
I'll push. I'll say 1 starter goes 6 innings in the next 4. The Phillies offense is what scares me in this one. And it doesn't help that the Mets don't have a lot of guys that kind of push the limits deep into games. Yes or no, will the Mets beat the Phillies at least once in London? Joe, I'll say yes. I think the Mets at least split with the Phillies. Maybe I'm a blind optimist or just an idiot at this point. There's too much adrenaline out in London, international series. Good Mets presence I am expecting. If our listeners of the pod have showed us anything, I think the Mets fans will show out in London. I would predict a split, but simply it's a yes for this.
Yep, I'm going to go yes as well. I would expect a split, but I know we both may be crazy. I'm hoping to steal 2 games from Philly overseas.
Who will start more at catcher? Nito, Torrens, or an even split, Joe?
Oh, I will go.
Ride the hot bat.
Who's the hot bat? Nito?
Torrens.
Nito's hitting too. That's the thing. Go look. Nito's been hitting pretty well too. It's going to be, I will say, jokes aside, it will be interesting to see what decision they make for the backup catcher once Alvarez comes back, because both Torrens and Nito are out of options. But back to the scoreboard, I will say they will split. They will play a couple each. They're flying overseas, so they'll make sure they split the duties there, and all it takes is splitting these next 2 with Washington. Yeah,
it's a split. Because of the travel, there's just no way that you're going to, have one of these guys play back-to-back in London. So it comes down to the National Series. I'll go with the split as well. It just feels like the split would be almost minus 200 if you were setting an odds board. Over-under push is set at 2 for Mets wins. I'm going to push here, Joe. I think they go 500 over the next 4. But, man, I'll say it right now, and we said it in the open, they need to go 3 out of 4. And I don't care that it's the Phillies. The Mets need to win 3 out of the next 4 games this week. But I'll say they don't. I say they split.
I'm going to say over because they have to. And just like you said, Connor, I think they have to. So I'm going to say they're going to do that. And if we come back on the show this time next week and they went under, the conversation's going to really start that shift.
All right, let's close this out with the regular mailbag questions. This is from Noah Schwartz on YouTube. Hey, guys. I was looking at some Statcast numbers from this year and last. So many Mets are among the unluckiest hitters in the game as it pertains to expected batting average versus their actual batting average, expected slugging versus actual slugging, etc. Pete, Beatty, and Marte were very unlucky last year, and Lindor and Nimmo are very unlucky this year. Other than City being such a tough place to hit, why else are our guys getting such unfortunate results? I'll say, and Noah didn't mention this in the question, Joe. I think the shift rules have completely hampered McNeil, and physically he doesn't look like the same guy. But I don't really have thoughts on the five guys Noah mentioned and Pete, Beatty, Marte, Lindor, and Nimmo. So I would love to hear yours.
I think the stadium certainly plays a factor. Citi Field this year is playing like the biggest pitcher spark in the sport. So that is a bit of a change, and I don't know why that is. It's always been, more pitcher friendly than hitter friendly, but it's gone to a bit of an extreme. You do mention the lack of a shift. I think that certainly plays a role for a guy like McNeil and for everybody to some degree. Everyone got hits advantage, against the shift. When it comes to luck, it is that, right? It is in a way that it's not something that you can say, man, it's this or it's that. It is sometimes as simple as you hit the ball 105 miles an hour and the shortstop happened to be standing there, or you hit a ball into the gap and the guy dove and caught it. So that's where I think it's a useful tool to look at expected stats. I think it's a way to project within the confines of that season, like there could be better days ahead. But I think at times, fans and we'll go on Baseball Savant and we'll see expected and we'll be like, well, they should be better. And it doesn't always work out that way. It's expected, right? Like there's things that happen. They are ultimately humans playing games, and they're not, just robots that hit the ball to a spot and it's going to be a hit. So expected stats, I would caution people to not put way too much stock into it because there's just too many factors that go into it.
I agree fully. I think it's gone too far. It was very interesting in the beginning, and now it's gone to the point where you lean on it. I think this as well, just a trend that sticks out to me when you look at some of the guys Noah mentioned, Pete, Beatty specifically. I know Nimmo has good sprint speed, so I don't think it affects him as much, and clearly Lindor can run. And Marte, with the injuries, it's been hot and cold. I feel like athleticism has to play into some of that as well. Like when you hit the ball, and this doesn't have to do with luck and expected batting average, but it just feels like at times, and the Mets are getting better with this, but the lack of athleticism at times really, really hurts the Mets. And I think it's something that can play into you getting some of those extra hits, right? Quite frankly, right? If you're not going to be hitting the ball the hardest, you want to be a more athletic team. And I feel like the Mets have found themselves, not with the young guys, but with this core, they are a little bit of an in-between team. Like with the young guys, Francisco Alvarez and Mark Vientos hit the absolute heck out of the baseball when they make contact. Luis Angel Acuna, who doesn't hit the ball hard, can run like the wind. So it feels like with the younger guys, they have a little bit more of that opposite, where this group, I don't know. I think I even found myself expecting more athleticism out of Lindor at times. I think he obviously had the 30 steals last year, but when Lindor puts a ball in play, it doesn't feel like, look out kind of speed on the base paths. It feels like more nuanced intelligence on the base paths than just pure athleticism at this stage of his career.
For sure. And it's maybe in a way, the way Marte does it, it's preservation to a degree. Like Francisco Lindor plays 160 to 162 games a year. So he can't, as much as you want to see it, he can't sprint out every single ground ball at full speed. He can't try to stretch every single hit to a double. So it's a bit of preservation, and especially with Marte on the injury side of things, when he hits ground balls, he's not sprinting down the baseline. But when he's on base, he still shows the ability to get to second pretty easily for stealing bases.
All right, the last question on today's show from Kyle Decker, 9699. This is from YouTube. If this season doesn't turn around, and to be fair, that is looking less likely as time runs out, What could this lineup / rotation look like post-deadline if they sell as much as they can, including Pete? And would there be any storylines call-ups that could happen after the fact for the real masochists like me who will likely still be watching? Kyle, you are one of us. You could be the third chair on the Met spot at that point. Joe, I mean, let's rapid fire it, Joe. I'll throw who's gone at you. And
Okay.
you, knowing this system that you probably rattle off the names in your sleep, try to give me a lineup. And I know that's a little bit of an unfair ask. You don't even have to order it, but just basically who's playing where. Pete's gone. McNeil's gone. I don't know if somebody's going to take on Marte. That's an interesting one to me. I'll say JD Martinez is gone. I'll say Bader's gone for sure. I will say that Severino is definitely gone. Mania could be. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Right. We don't have to do the bullpen because that's just absolutely ridiculous. Like 75% of the bullpen will be gone if the Mets blow this up, and they're trending towards that way. But I'll keep it kind of easy right now and say Bader. You know what? For fun's sake, I will say Marte is gone. So Bader and Marte from the outfield, McNeil and Pete from the infield.
All right. So we got Vientos at first.
So you're going to move him over. And just let Beatty ride out the second half of the season.
And just see what happens.
You got it.
Then you'll have Acuna at second. I think they will give him a look in the second half. If Drew Gilbert continues on the trajectory that he is, he should hopefully be back in game action here in the next couple of weeks. And if he goes back to AAA Syracuse and hits, there's obviously going to be an opportunity for him in the outfield. Tyrone Taylor, it's not like they have a plethora of young players, so maybe Tyrone Taylor plays a corner. And man, do we just need to throw DJ Stewart at the DH and just have him have another magical August and September and hit home runs? And then Joe is shaking his fist at the sky because it's messing with the draft lottery odds. That certainly could be a possibility. But in the lineup, I would say there is the possibility to have a high infusion of youth. But when you go to the rotation, we talked about Mike Vasil, Dom Hamel. Maybe one of them gets an opportunity, but I think that would certainly put Jose Butto full-time in the rotation. It could be Joey Lucchesi. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Blade Tidwell could push himself to the bigs this year, but I would lean what you said earlier in the show, Connor, that it's probably more of a 2025 thing. I think when it comes to the young players, more of the excitement would be on the offensive side, and obviously Christian Scott would be back, so Christian Scott would be in the rotation too.
So then the lineup, it doesn't wildly change because you're taking Pete out of the top, but you're probably, I don't think you're going to let Acuna lead off as soon as he gets here.
You bat him at the bottom of the order.
Like Nimmo and Lindor, maybe you do slide Alvarez into the 3-hole and see what happens and let Vientos hit cleanup. I mean, that might be what you're looking at that point.
Yeah, it would be fun.
Yeah, I mean, like Kyle said, like when people like us watch, you could take positivity out of any bright moment from those guys because they're such young players that they'd be really athletic. I'll tell you that. With Gilbert and Acuna up on here and Vientos shifting over to first where he's probably better suited in the long term. It'd be
more fun than years past where the second half has had Alejandro Diaz's and Austin Jacksons and Aaron Altairs just taking at bats and batting in the middle of the order every day. There would at least, in my opinion, and some Mets fans may disagree, but I think it would at least give some motivation for people to watch and even go to the ballpark, honestly. The Mets may or may not win, but you'll get the opportunity to see young players that in 2025 have the opportunity to take on full-time roles for a team that obviously would be looking to, turn the page and change what the Mets are all about.
I'm not saying these Mets don't play hard, but guys that are up for their first cup of coffee in the major leagues will play like it's Game 7 of the World Series every single day. Those guys will take nothing for granted. And Gilbert already plays like that anyway all the time. Yeah. So,
and you know what? When you talk about that, shout out to Jose Iglesias.
That's where I was just going to close the show. Yeah. I said we cannot do this episode without giving Jose Iglesias some love. Please.
Yeah, man, good for Jose Iglesias. Obviously a longtime big leaguer. He's been around the block for quite some time. And, he was in AAA with the Mets and performing decently well. But his perspective coming up, feeling like a rookie again, and Mark Vientos shouting him out as someone that helped him a lot when they were both with AAA Syracuse. it's one of those things that, he may not have many offensive days like he did on Monday where he had 3 hits and, he was a huge part of things for the Mets win against Washington. I think he's going to be a positive to keep in this locker room for the rest of the season, especially if the Mets do end up in sell mode, because he will be that one of very few remaining veteran presences for these young players to lean on for some advice.
Right. And Iglesias is such an interesting story. It just feels like he's in the wrong era. Like 30 years ago, Iglesias would be a starter every day, probably for 15 years. And when you look at his major league career, and he's been around since 2011, he's a guy that hits for high average, doesn't get on base at a crazy clip, and doesn't hit for power, and doesn't steal a ton of bases. But he hits for high average. And that kind of player has gone, that's a lost thing in today's game in terms of what's being valued. So he's had to grind to just be on a major league roster. And it looks like he's going to really embrace and take full control of that opportunity. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag, whether it's down on the farm, whether it's the Major League Mailbag at the end of every show. And, of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. Interesting week ahead for the Mets with the International Series out in London. We'll catch you guys next week.